hurrah for Julie. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So welcome to our session around doing a weekly review. We've got over 140 people on the session, and we're expecting a few more people to join us. So please do post any specific questions that you have in the Q&A section. There will be plenty of time for Q&A during the course of our time together. Anything we don't get to answer, I'll make sure it's kind of put up onto our website as a blog post. I'm interested to know in the chat how you're getting on with your weekly reviews. There's lots of comments coming through there. Some people are doing a weekly review, some people are struggling, some people are perhaps recognizing the need to do a weekly review. So I'm going to assume from the beginning that people aren't too sure perhaps what a weekly review is. So for those of you who are familiar, we'll do a bit of a recap. I might ask for some examples of some of the things that you might do in your weekly review to just give people a bit of a flavour. But I want to leave as much time and space as possible for responding to your comments and questions. 162 people on the call now, so difficult perhaps to find things in the chat. If you've got a specific question, please make sure you post that in the Q&A, and then I will dip in and out of the chat. But as we know, as productivity ninjas, kind of multitasking doesn't really work so well. So I'm going to focus on the weekly review and answering any questions that you have. So I am one of a team of productivity ninjas. There's 5 of us in the UK, more people around the world, helping people with productivity, well-being, reducing that sense of feeling overwhelmed. A key part of that is doing this weekly review. It really is an integral part of making sure that we're on that kind of journey to being a productivity ninja and having some clarity around what we need to prioritize and focus our energy on. So those of you who are familiar with our work will know the core productivity model. For those of you who are less familiar, there are 4 stages to this model. The first is how we collect the work. Like, how do we know we need to do something? That's the kind of the collection phase. Then, well, we might get an email, we might get some minutes of meetings, we might have an idea that pops into our head, and we collect those all together. But then we need to start organising them in a kind of a logical way to help us interact with those tasks much more easily. So that's things like breaking it down to the next physical action, identifying what project or area or part of your life it relates to. We're going to talk this afternoon. We've got till 2:45 to talk about the review. I'm aiming to kind of talk for 20-25 minutes tops, and then we'll get on to your questions. But the review is where we step into a more strategic mode, and we really start thinking perhaps quite critically or quite ruthlessly about what it is that we have on our plate, how we're going to do some prioritising in the coming week, and what can we do to be getting ready and prepared for what's coming up. The 4th stage of the model is, of course, doing the work. and a couple of people in the chat already have kind of alluded to, well, I'm capturing my stuff, but something's going wrong and it's not quite getting to that do stage. So there are some things to work on in the organise and review sections in order for that to happen. A couple of people have asked some further questions about whether the session is being recorded. It is being recorded, and it will be on our YouTube channel in the next few days. So what do our clients say about reviewing? These comments are all feedback from sessions that we've run, people explaining how they find that weekly review helpful. I saw a hand go up there for a moment. So let's find out if somebody had a question. Azette, I'm just going to unmute you. So you popped your hand up. Did you have a question or a comment? Okay, Azette, I've unmuted you. I'll leave you unmuted for a few moments, and do feel free to come in if you have a question. If not, you can post that in the Q&A, and I will unmute you again in a moment. So yeah, the review being an integral part of people's working system. You know, people who've got a lot of work, a number of commitments that they need to be thinking about. this is going to really, really help. That comment there from Homestart Barnett, I love the idea of a weekly review for staying on top of the work and the well-being and overall life balance. That's the key thing that we're looking to achieve here. It is about getting some of the work done. It is about getting some of the right work done, but it's not it's not about just getting the work done. It's about that well-being and balance piece as well. Here we have some real life messages from Slack, which is the internal communications tool that we use at Think Productive. My colleague Jess here is saying, like, oh, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. So important to share this stuff if that's how you're feeling. And then Elena, who's our managing director, saying to Jess, look, just capture what you can for after the holidays and deal with it in your next review. So this is how we deal with things at Think Productive. We capture the work and then we catch up on it when we do our weekly review. For me, the weekly review is key time of the week for getting back on top of things. It's an opportunity to check in with how I'm doing in terms of my exercise. I went to an exercise class this morning, so I'm doing all right with that. But morale, stress, mood levels, am I taking breaks regularly? Am I having some time to think? I did our Fixing Meetings workshop with an organisation yesterday, and I was really struck by people's kind of closing comments were like, this has actually given me some time to think. I often in my role don't get time to think properly. So making sure, using the review as an opportunity to have that thinking time, but also if you need more of that, to be able to block that out during the course of the week and to really think, am I getting an opportunity to do that kind of work? So this is a key habit. And some of you might be coming to the session today kind of thinking, I want to find out a bit more about this productivity ninja thing. What's this about? Maybe you're feeling a bit overwhelmed. And now it says here that you're going to have to spend between an hour and 2 hours a week doing a weekly review. And you might be worried that you don't have that time already. So I want to reassure you that you do a lot of this thinking already, but you probably do it for a few minutes here and a few minutes there. What we want you to do is batch it up all together. Now, my colleague Matthew says, oh, this never takes me like 2 hours. For me, if I do my review in kind of an hour and 40 minutes, I'm quite happy. I feel like I've done quite well. It might take you a bit longer the first time. It will also depend on the complexity of your role, how up to date your second brain is, or your to-do list if you don't have a second brain. The focus here is really about staying in control. This helps to give us a feeling of Zen-like calm, that sense that actually, yeah, the work is under control. Things are running well for us in terms of our balance between our work and our priorities outside of work. So you're probably wondering what a weekly review involves. So let's think about that for a few moments. Those of you who are familiar with our work will know what a second brain is. A second brain is a bit like a to-do list, but a little bit more sophisticated because there are different levels and layers of thinking brought into that to-do list rather than just having one list of stuff. But if you haven't done that yet, you can still do your weekly review using a more traditional kind of to-do list. And your review is an opportunity to say, is everything here in my second brain up to date? Am I on track with the key projects that I care about and the things that I want to be moving forward? I will sometimes talk to people who say, this isn't really working out for me, this whole second brain thing. I'm finding it difficult. It's not working for me. And when I ask them how their weekly review is going, they'll say, oh, I haven't really done that bit. I'm like, yeah, okay. This is the thing that helps you to build trust in that second brain. The idea of your second brain is that it does the job of remembering the things that your regular first brain can't remember. There's a comment there in the chat from Kerry saying, I can't get mine below 2 hours. We'll explore what's going on in a moment there, Kerry. I mean, if it's at the 2 hour mark, it might just be that you have a high workload and there's a lot of things to look through. If it's significantly more than that, then we'll need to have a think about why. So we want to create trust in the systems that we have set up around us, and the weekly review is an integral part of doing that. There are 5 stages to this weekly review. Now, the first is getting your inputs back to 0. So Kerry is saying, I can't get mine below 2 hours. And I'm wondering if that's because the inputs aren't at 0 regularly. So whilst it says there that during our weekly review, we want to get our inputs to 0, for me, that's a backup plan. I don't want to spend the majority of the time in my weekly review getting my inputs down to 0. What we mean by inputs is all the places where lots of work come to you from. So I have a list of places that during my weekly review, I will get down to 0. So our Slack, our internal comms channel, my inbox will be at 0 or very close to it. When I'm in meetings, in person or online actually, or perhaps just on the train doing some thinking, I might jot down in my notebook some tasks and actions, and I put a little A in a circle to show that it's an action. Part of getting my inputs to 0 is to go through my notebook, find all of the things that have got an A in a circle next to them, and make sure that's either done or put into my second brain. That's a big part, getting my inputs to 0. I try and do that most days, so I don't leave it for the entire week to do those all at once. Sometimes that does happen. I'm human, not a superhero. So you want to be getting your inputs to 0, ideally daily, or at least a few times a week. The weekly review being kind of the backup plan for that. Okay. The second stage is kind of reviewing the second brain, looking at any planners that you might have, any, what's coming up in your calendar. Have you got any lists that you need to update? Thinking like a boss is making decisions, prioritizing and planning for the week ahead. What do I want my priorities to be? I try most weeks to choose no more than 3 priorities for the week. And I will say to myself, what is it I really need to focus on this week? And I will write those things down on a post-it note that then sits on my desk for the week to remind me that they're the things I really need to be focusing my energy and attention on. So easy to get sidetracked by the new and shiny things that people might mention, perhaps in a meeting, perhaps a conversation I have with somebody. And I think, oh yeah, that's exciting. I want to get stuck into that. Well, how does that relate to the things that are my priorities? Sometimes those priorities are going to change because you need to be agile and able to adapt to the changing world of work around you. But just pausing for a few moments and saying, actually, is that the right choice to make? Is that the best use of my energy and attention? I'm getting ready for the practical stuff that's coming up in the weeks ahead. Part of my weekly review, I'm always looking forward by about 3 weeks to capture any actions, anything I need to do. Have I got my train tickets booked? And anything very practical that needs to happen, or meetings I've got that I need to prepare for. I'll also look back 2 weeks in the calendar as well, were there any meetings I attended or I've got actions and I need to make sure I've captured those into my second brain. Is there anything where maybe something got cancelled because somebody was off sick and I want to make sure that conversation happens? So that keeps me in the driving seat of deciding, is that a priority? Section 5 is more the things around our health and our happiness. How can we be more ruthless? Maybe noticing if we're being resistant towards certain tasks. So sometimes it seems like a great idea to do all these things and you add them into your second brain. Then you come back to look at them, you think, actually, that's not going to make a big impact. That's not going to make a big difference. So the review is an opportunity perhaps to take those things out. This is just a kind of an example of what a checklist might look like. I've been doing a weekly review. I mean, not every week. I certainly intend to do it every week. Hasn't happened yet this week. I normally do my weekly review on a Monday morning. I was delivering training on Monday this week. I did quite a big chunk of my weekly review this morning, but I didn't quite finish it because I had a call at 10:30. So we've got the getting the inputs back to 0. We've kind of talked about that. We've covered that. The second, making sure that your second brain is up to date in step 2. That's looking at your your second brain or your to-do list if you don't have that second brain tool in place? Are there any things in your waiting file in your inbox that you want to chase up on now? The review is a good time to look at that. It says they're looking a week or 2 weeks ahead. I go with 3 because I'm increasingly finding myself on trains and going and delivering training in person again. So these are just some examples of the types of things you might be asking in steps 3 and 4. Section 5 is often the bit that people say is new to them, that they perhaps haven't thought about before. How are you doing in terms of your well-being? Did you feel quite stressed last week? What caused that? What might you do differently to try to mitigate the impact of that this week? Noticing if there are any particular tasks that you're resisting. For me, this is a bit where I always make sure I've got my kind of exercise planned in for the week to make sure that that happens. I'd be really interested actually if people are willing to share in the chat any great questions that they ask themselves in section 5. So just pause for a moment or two so that people can do that. I can read them out anonymously. If you want to just send it to host and panelists, then I'll assume that it's an anonymous question. Yeah, anything I can ditch? That's a great question. What can I get rid of? An opportunity here to be ruthless and say, actually, that's not going to happen. Anything to delegate as well. So it might be ditch or delegate. If you have people you can delegate to. I'll take a couple of others. Did I keep my promises for the week? That's lovely. Yeah, and if not, what am I going to do about that? Excellent. Jessica's saying, have I spent enough time doing what I love this week? I think that's super important. That's a nice question, Yemi. Who will be affected if I don't do this? Joanne's saying, am I listening to my body? Yeah. How is this serving me? That's a lovely question. I've got a question there about email and inbox to 0, so I'll come to that later on. Okay. Some lovely examples there of section 5 questions. I love them. I think this is often the one that when we do our workshops, people find most useful. Martin's got a nice question as well. Any quick wins that I've missed? Yeah, lovely. I'll let you read those as they continue to come through. There's some really helpful questions there in section 5. And I'm going to be updating my checklist to incorporate some of those. So on that, what can we ditch? What can we delegate? We want to use the review as an opportunity for us to save some time. You know we can spend 80% of our effort on getting that last 20% of something like kind of really perfect and perfecting it. So if we want to give 80% of our effort and attention to the things that are going to make the most difference, what is that going to look like in the coming week? Thinking, what can we not do? That might mean we get rid of something. We say, actually, we're not going to do that. It might be renegotiating some deadlines or some boundaries. So we use this opportunity to save us some time. So while sitting down and thinking about it strategically, making some ruthless decisions does require an investment of our time and energy. The payoff is greater. Oh, I've just seen Georgina's question come in. What achievements would I share with a senior colleague or my family that would make them say, wow? I really like that. I kind of want to check in with Georgina every week to see what's coming up there. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. That's brilliant. So thinking as well about what are your big rocks? What is it that you're working on this week that's going to make the most impact, the most difference? The big rocks analogy comes from Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If we have a bucket and we put the sand in first and then the pebbles, there probably isn't space for our big rocks. If we're putting our big rocks in first and then popping the pebbles in, then we can put the sand in afterwards, and it will fit in around all those little gaps, and we'll fit it all in there. So people often say, oh, I don't get round to the big, important, strategic projects, but I'm dealing really nicely with the business as usual kind of stuff. So trying to work on some of those big, important, strategic projects first thing, so we get some of the next physical actions that relate to those projects done. Then our big rocks are in the bucket. The pebbles are kind of the meetings and the other little bits of work, the ad hoc requests that might come in that relate to different projects. Perhaps the sand is the phone calls, the emails, the ad hoc kind of quick conversations. They will all fit in around the other stuff. Let's try not to prioritize them. So Sarah's saying she's not very good at putting those big rocks in first. So Sarah, like, in fact, let's everybody just go to your to-do list now. Like, what's one of the big rocks? What is it that you're going to focus on when we finish our webinar today at 2:45? So some key things for us to think about in times of the weekly review. When are you going to do it? When's it going to fit into your schedule? Now, I think the weekly review is something to do at the time of the week and the time of the day when your energy and your focus is at its very best. I'm a morning person. Okay, I do my best thinking in the morning. If I've got to write a blog post or do anything to do with numbers, if I've got to get a spreadsheet to add up, for me, I'm going to have to do that first thing in the mornings. That's when I want to be doing my weekly review. I used to work in a team, had a team meeting on a Thursday morning. So I used to do my weekly review on a Wednesday morning because that kind of worked for me to go into that team meeting, having a real clear idea of what my priorities were, what I was working on at that point in time. I usually now try and do my weekly review on a Monday morning, just because that works well for me. Generally, people have less training on a Monday. And I need to do it in the morning. The earlier, the better, to be quite honest. What are you going to do to ensure that you're at your very best, that you've got that kind of proactive level of attention? So for me, it's kind of my ideal world would be to get up, get my cup of tea and get straight stuck into my weekly review. I always try and do my weekly review at my desk, but that doesn't always need to work for everybody else. I'm quite lucky. I've got an office at home where I can do that. When I used to work in an open plan office, I would always do my weekly review in one of the meeting rooms. Where else have I done my weekly review? The train can be a good place, actually, because the only people who are coming to interrupt me are people who are coming to offer me a cup of tea or coffee. That always goes down quite nicely. So just thinking about, where do you have access to everything that you need to get your inputs down to 0 and to be able to have some uninterrupted concentrating and thinking time? Is there anybody whose help you need or accountability to be able to say, actually, you know, if you're in a role that's quite customer facing and maybe you do some project work as well, and there's a team of you, it might be that you can't all do your weekly review at the same time. You need to be able to respond to those customer inquiries or whatever else they might be. It might be that you need some permission to be able to not be dealing with emails or phone calls at a particular time of the day. It might be that you're somebody like me who gets their best stuff done if they know that they're accountable to people. So knowing that I'm delivering training several times a week, talking to people about the importance of a weekly review, that helps me to stay accountable. I want to be able to say to people, yeah, I do my weekly review most weeks, and I do. So that's helpful. So just thinking about what's going to work for you. I'm interested to know in the chat if you've got any particularly great places to get your weekly review done. Georgina's saying when she was in Good Habits for the weekly review, she did that at the local library. Yeah, pre-COVID, but the libraries are open again now. You might be able to go back there. Sometimes it's a coffee shop. Sometimes when I've been, particularly in central London, kind of between in-person sessions or meetings, I go to a posh hotel where I can get a big pot of tea and I can sit there for quite a long time and get my review done. Pete is sharing something that I hear fairly often from people in workshops around doing the review at the end of the week, because it makes it easier to switch off for the weekend. So just bearing in mind how that might work for you. Somebody else is asking around like doing a daily review, saying they can spend 10-15 minutes. Like I do a daily review as well. It's probably much shorter than that because I'm doing most of the heavy lifting in my weekly review. You know, my daily review is, you know, the things that I plan to do today, are they still the most impactful, the most relevant things? It might be that I've had a client who's asked me to put in a proposal for delivering a number of workshops for them. That might take priority if they need that quite quickly, for instance. Hi, Sarah. Sarah's been asking about quarterly goals. Always seem lower time pressure than client work. Yes, perhaps just recognizing what those quarterly goals are and making sure you're doing something each week to move forwards towards getting a bit closer to some of those goals. But also remembering that the client work probably forms part of some of those goals at least as well. Yeah, people stepping away from their desk. Yeah, I've got one client who used to work in a big open plan space. And she used to say, you know, the orange chairs were her thinking space. So she was supposed to be kind of thinking rather than doing. She would head there. She was supposed to be doing some doing. She'd go to another floor. There are some green comfy chairs. So just to make that little distinction. Lovely question here about how do you balance work and personal reviews? I personally do them together. I do that all in one go because it all needs to be done. It feels like a more effective way to work through some of that stuff. I suppose there are elements of my personal life that I do review separately because I need my partner's involvement to do that. We have a small child, my partner works shifts. We need to work out who's going to take the child to school, who's going to walk the dog, who's going to do the cooking. So we do on a Sunday evening, usually, probably no more than 10 minutes, just kind of go through our calendars, divvying up some of that and making some plans is very helpful. Laura's sitting in the garden to do hers. That's nice. I might try that. I love that as an idea. Yeah, depending on the weather. Fabulous. Okay. So opening this up for any questions, I can see that there are already a handful of questions here. So I'm going to head to those first. So Sarah, your question about quarterly goals getting sidelined, I would identify what those quarterly goals are, have them somewhere quite visual if you're a visual person, and be clear on what the next physical action is. What is it you need to do to enable you to move that thing forwards a little bit? By a next physical action, I mean, if somebody was watching you do it, what would they see you do? And that's always what we want to put on our to-do list rather than just the goal itself. Okay. Greg is saying, I already undertake a 15-minute daily review, looking at the day ahead in terms of priorities. What must I do? What should I do? Trying to remain agile and able to adjust course depending on what's happening. Is this complementary or contradictory to a weekly review? I think it's very complementary to a weekly review. I think if you were to do a bit more of that in the weekly review, your daily review might get a little bit shorter. There's another question about what tools do I use for my weekly review. I use my calendar, I use my notebook, probably some post-it notes to put my 3 priorities for the week on, and my second brain tool. And Jess has just shared in the chat there, thank you Jess, a little link to a YouTube video on how to set up a second brain tool. Andrew's asking about discipline. If I could just encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A as well, rather than chat. Jess, perhaps you could help keep an eye on the chat. That would be fabulous. Maintaining discipline of a weekly review. I often succumb to firefighting. Yeah, I think that is hard. I think putting that firefighting to one side and saying, actually, getting clear on my priorities will really help me. I block that time out in my calendar. So I have a link to my calendar. So if people want to book an appointment with me for clients, existing clients, prospective clients, that review time is blocked out. They can't do that while I'm doing my weekly review. Maybe creating some external accountability. It will partly depend on how good you are at internal expectations and meeting them. So if you're not very good at that, you might want to make those expectations external. Maybe giving yourself a reward for doing your weekly review. So what might that be? Okay, we've got some more questions coming in. Lovely question from Greg about whether the weekly review should be an individual activity or could it be done as a group? I don't know, experiment. I mean, I think it is an individual activity. If you're getting together to do your review as a group, that creates some of that external accountability that is so useful for many of us, particularly those of us who are what Gretchen Rubin refers to as upholders, like we're good at meeting external expectations. So having a review as a group might help and enable people who work well like that to do it. But people who are not so good at that, or perhaps don't like that, might find that tricky. So you need to keep that optional, I think. But that might be a really good way of perhaps even sharing some of those Section 5 things. I think that might be quite a nice activity to do as a group. And we have internally at Think Productive previously talked about doing kind of a group weekly review. So if that's something people are interested in, they should get in touch with us and let us know that. Claire's asking a wonderful question about, is the weekly review a time to plan when you might do a certain task or put it in the calendar? That's a great question. And I think it depends on what the task is. I often see people's calendars where they've put all their stuff on when they plan to do it in the calendar. And they're booked 5, 6, 7 weeks in advance with all the tasks that they plan to do at different times. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't take into account what's happened since the last weekly review. Things are going to change in those kind of 5, 6 weeks. So I would block out time in your calendar to do your weekly review. I would block out time in the calendar to do the types of tasks that require your full energy and concentration. So if you've got a deadline and you know that you've got to put in a tender, for example, you might block some time out in your calendar to do that. I wouldn't do it for all of your tasks. Instead, I would use your second brain and the idea of kind of the context, matching the types of tasks that you need to get done to your energy levels throughout the day to help you to move those things forward. Okay, we've got a few other questions. Jess, you should feel free to pull out anything that's coming through on the chat if you can. Kerry's asking, how do I avoid repetition? My employer uses a Jira board to assign work, but copying all of this into my second brain feels repetitive and a waste of time. Yeah, it does sound that way, doesn't it? You might be able to, I'm not familiar with Jira, but you might be able to use Jira as your second brain tool, potentially. And it depends on the type of work. So, for instance, if you're dealing with, I know if you're in an IT support type role and you get tickets through with requests for urgent things, and that's probably always going to take priority over some of the more strategic stuff. And when you're doing some of the more strategic stuff, the looking ahead, the planning, the thinking, then there needs to be some agreement perhaps with other people on the team that they might take on or lead on some of those other tasks. You want to try and avoid having all your tasks in lots of different places. But in this example, it sounds like maybe you're spending a bit of time in Jira each day and moving some of those tasks forward and then coming out and going into your second brain might be useful. Kerry, let me know if that helps. If those things that are coming to you in the Jira board need instant attention, then that might be a bit different. I mentioned there how you might use your second brain to be able to match the types of tasks that you're working on to your energy levels. So there's a question about that. So I'll elaborate a bit more. we talk about this idea of context and identifying particular tasks that you can use in many of the second brain tools by putting a label or a tag on something. So some of my context might be things that I need to do when I'm in my office. So if I've got stuff to print out, the only place I can do that really is in my office. I'm increasingly spending a bit more time on trains. So there are some things where I can do, and it doesn't really matter where I do them, I can do them anywhere. So I might have a context that says anywhere, and then when I'm out and about, I can get some stuff done while I'm on the train. My rule for that is that when I'm at home, when I'm traveling home, I try and read my book and relax and switch off from my work stuff. Other examples of context might be things that require my full energy and concentration. So I might have a context that says concentrate, another context that says quick and easy for the times of the day that are the opposite to that. So rather than going through your to-do list or your second brain and looking at all these tasks and thinking, oh, I don't fancy doing that right now, that doesn't quite match what I'm in the mood to do, you can just pull up a list of things that would be suitable for the place or the person you're talking to, even perhaps. So I hope that clarifies. We have another question, an anonymous question. How do you manage the balance between supporting your line reports and junior people versus making time to focus on big strategic tasks? That's a complicated but very good question. So thank you for that. I think it depends on supporting those more junior people and direct reports. Depends how much support they need. Right, if they're in their first few days, they're probably going to have lots of questions. So might you be able to buddy them up with somebody else? When I used to manage a team of people who were all quite competent in their roles, quite experienced in what they were doing, I had a time of the day, I think it was 11 o'clock in the morning actually. And I would say to them, right, if you need something urgently from me and it's not having a response from me is slowing down your work, then come and interrupt me and let me know. Otherwise, see if that thing can wait till 11 o'clock. So if they thought of that thing and it popped into their head at 10:30, instead of coming and interrupting me or sending me an email, they've got to wait till 11 o'clock. And then I'm available, I can have a chat with them, we can get that thing unstuck and it moves forward. If they remember at midday, they might need to wait till 11 o'clock the next day. If it can't wait till then, they can come and interrupt me. But what that does is it helps to minimize some of those interruptions and distractions. I did some work recently with a marketing team. So they're doing marketing stuff. They're very responsive to things that are happening on social media for their clients. They said, well, we can't wait that long. What they decided to do was if they had something they wanted to ask a colleague a question about, they wrote that down in their notebook, and instead of interrupting them each time something popped into their head, they would interrupt them each time they'd got 3 things written down next to that person's name in their notebook. So they were able to reduce their interruptions of each other by 66%. So that's still quite a good saving. So that's that question. Question from Diana: would you recap about second brain tools or signpost? And then apparently we've answered that one already as that question is being typed. So no worries, Diana. There are some resources on the Think Productive website around second brain and tips for that. And I think Jess will probably share some of those in the follow-up email with a link to any kinds of online checklist examples or blog posts around that. So how are we doing for time? We're due to finish in the next 5 minutes or so. So if people do have any further questions, then let me know. If any of the Think Productive team have spotted any questions in the chat that I haven't answered, then do please let me know. If you're interested in finding out a bit more about Think Productive and what we do, we have some public workshops that might be of interest to you. We have our email survival guide on the 14th of September. That's an online workshop. We'll be taking you through all the tips and tools, the things that you need to help manage your inbox and get your inbox down to 0 and keep it there or somewhere very close to it. We have our 1-day deep dive into how to set up your second brain, how to manage high volumes of work, and that's the How to Be a Productivity Ninja session. We're doing that one online as well, and we're going to do that on the 7th and the 8th of September. So there will be a morning session on both of those days. So we're just kind of splitting that one-day course into 2 to help manage your attention on Zoom. So Sarah's asking, are there any more detailed resources on what the 5 areas of the review involve? So yes, there are on our YouTube channel and on the Productivity Ninja Academy. And I will speak to Jess to make sure we send out a link in the follow-up email to those things for you. Sarah, I know Sarah, at least I'm pretty sure I've spoken with Sarah in the last few days. So Sarah, I can also drop you an email with some further details on that and an example checklist if that would be useful for you. So I will stick around if people have got any other thoughts or questions or comments. There was a question earlier on about how do I manage my email? Like, need some tips on that. So you might want to come along to the email survival guide session. Chapter 4 in Graham's book, How to Be a Productivity Ninja, focuses very heavily on email, covers all the things we do in our 3-hour Getting Your Inbox to Zero course. But essentially, my top tips would be not to be in your inbox all the time, perhaps go into your inbox, reduce it down to 0, come out again and focus on the work that makes the most impact. Pleasure. So thank you all very much for your time. As I say, I'll stick around if people have got further questions, but I'll end the recording there as well.